Good afternoon, everyone. We are super excited to convene the very first meeting of the Independent Oversight Committee for the Transportation Sales Surtax. Today's meeting is going to be primarily organizational, but it's an opportunity for all of us to start to get to know each other as we'll be working together. So to kick us off, a quick introduction to the Metropolitan Planning Organization. I'm Beth Alden. I'm the Executive Director of the Hillsborough Metropolitan Planning Organization for Transportation. And we are here to be your administrative support. And we are prepared to answer, at least attempt to answer any and all questions that you may have. Large or small, we will do our best to help you move forward as you look at the best use of our sales tax dollars and work with our local governments on that. What is the MPO? We are a creature of federal law. The federal government likes to make sure that our gas tax dollars get spent on major projects that are supported at the local level. And so there is a requirement that local governments come together and agree on long-range plans for major investments in transportation. And so that is our primary focus as an organization. In support of that, we do convene a number of advisory committees, and so we have that kind of infrastructure in place to have regular public meetings. We have a Citizens Advisory Committee that Mr. Fernandez serves on. We have a Technical Advisory Committee. We have a meeting calendar that's up on our website for your use. And we provide social media in support of these public meetings. So anyway, we are here basically at your disposal and to help you. So a couple of logistical points. If you didn't sign in when you walked in, please sign in on your way out so that we have a record of your being here. This meeting is being conducted in compliance with the Government in the Sunshine Law, which your attorney will go over with you briefly a little later in the agenda. Emergency exits, I don't expect there to be an emergency, but if there is one, head back out to the elevator lobby to the far side of it and turn left. Restrooms, far side of the elevator lobby, turn right. And just in closing, we are part of an organization, Plan Hillsborough, which supports the Planning Commission, as well as the Hillsborough River Interlocal Board, so kind of all things long-range planning and community-focused. And we have values of transparency and stewardship and innovation. And please feel free to call on me at any time. And our staff person who we've designated to be your point of contact is Dr. Johnny Wong. So he'll be sitting with you during your meetings. He will be your primary point of contact. And I think our next item on our agenda is round robin introductions. So I will invite Johnny to introduce himself to you, and then you can go around and introduce yourselves to each other. And thank you again so much for participating in this group.
Is it on now? All right, well, still thanks. I think that I have chatted with just about everyone on this committee, so you know me and we've interacted. Johnny Wong, MPO staff. I am the staff support liaison for this committee. And since we have not yet adopted bylaws or elected a chair, I'm going to preside over the meeting until that point. That's a problem that we hope to solve before the end of this meeting. So why don't we start at the end of the far right end of the table and just introduce yourself, maybe the agency or governing board that appointed you, and take a minute to explain who you are so that we have an idea of who you are and where you're coming from.
I need your microphone. Okay. Thank you. My name is Vanetta Kilpatrick. I was nominated by, the Hillsborough County. I live in Lithia, far eastern part of the county, and my went to college here in the Tampa area. I was a military veteran, recently relocated, well, within the last couple of years, relocated my family here after concluding my military service, and just wanted to be involved in the county and make the decisions that affect our, day-to-day life here. So very happy and thankful to be a part of this forum. Thank you.
My name is Dan Aprilli. I'm here representing Temple Terrace. I've lived in Tampa all my life. I'm currently in the cattle business and have commercial properties. Hope to represent the board well.
I'm Dustin Lemke. I was nominated by Hart to be on the IOC. I work at Hillsborough Community College, and actually for 8 years, I didn't own a car in Tampa, and I went everywhere using Hart. So about a year ago, because of a job change, I did have to get a small Honda Civic, so I still try and take the bus a couple of days a week, though.
Good afternoon. I'm Sean Shaw. Until recently, I was the state representative for District 61, which includes where I live, Seminole Heights, and a little bit of East Tampa and West Tampa. And as you know, Seminole Heights is a very loud voice on the transportation issue, and I'm happy to be on this board.
Good evening. My name is Dan Rollerson, and like Sean, I'm a recovering politician. Spent time in the State House. The Plant City Commission, I was nominated by Doug Belden, and look forward to serving with all of you. Thank you.
My name is Arthenia Joyner. I was educated in the public schools of Hillsborough County. I'm a Florida A&M University graduate of with a bachelor's and a JD. And I recently termed out of the Florida legislature, having served 16 years, 6 in the House and 10 in the Senate. And I was appointed by former Mayor Buckhorn. And I'm pleased to be able to continue public service at this level.
Hello, my name is Ray Shermonti. I've been a planner most of my life in a lot of different positions. Right now, I am a realtor with the Tony Everett Company, and I was appointed by Bob Henriquez, the property appraiser.
Good afternoon. I'm Rick Fernandez, Tampa native, appointee of the Tampa City Council. The why I'm here part is probably because over the course of the last 5 years, I've dedicated a lot of my time to issues having to do with transportation, in particular fighting the Tampa Bay Express project and the expansion of the interstate through the urban core. And for better or worse, I think it's fair to say the City Council just got to know me from the podium for 5 years. So they knew who I was and where I was coming from. I think our being here now over the course next year or two is probably going to be among the most important time that we spend, because quite frankly, I think this project that we're engaging upon is going to get up and running over these next 2 years, and we're going to set the tone for it. So I'm really looking forward to working with all of you. I've researched some of you since we haven't been able to talk, and I really do look forward to getting to know all of you better. By education, training, I'm a lawyer, been one for 40 years, can't wash that off. Practiced law for a little over 20 years as a trial lawyer. Now I do executive search, attorney recruiting, and career coaching. And as Beth mentioned, I serve on the CAC, very, very happy to be doing that. So look forward to our time together over the next couple of years.
Good afternoon. I'm Manny Menendez, and I'm an appointee by the clerk of the court. So I'm the attorney who's a member of the Florida Bar according to the bylaws or the charter, I guess. I am an attorney. I served for a little over 30 years as a judge. I retired in 2014 as the chief judge of the circuit here. I have a BA and a JD from the University of Florida, and I look across the way here. I see a fellow who's got a nice cup with a big gator on it, so I appreciate that. In any event, I'm here because Pat Frank asked me to be here, and pleasure to meet all of you today. I do have one request of either Beth or Johnny, could we get a list of all the members and their names so that I might remember them next time? Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name's Chip Fletcher, and I'm here nominated by the Hillsborough County Commission. By way of by way of my background, I went to Florida Tech and earned a degree in engineering and worked as an engineer for a while, and then went on to practice law and served for a short period of time on the Tampa City Council, then as the Tampa City Attorney, and then most recently as Hillsborough County Attorney. Leaving Hillsborough County about a year and a half ago. So I'm happy to be here, happy to roll up my sleeves and do what we need to do to support the initiative by the voters of Hillsborough County to provide better transportation for Hillsborough County, and look forward to working with everybody on the committee and with the agency staff as well. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Bob Hunter. I was appointed, I guess, as one of the two experts by the Hillsborough County Board of County Commissioners. They didn't say what in, so I'll leave that up to you. I have a bachelor's and master's of architecture from Texas A&M University, and I've been the director of planning in San Antonio, Texas, Reno, Nevada, Kansas City, Missouri. And more recently, I was the executive director of the Hillsborough County County Planning Commission for 26 years, and then after retiring, I provided expert witness testimony concerning public and private organizations, transportation planning, and land use planning within the region. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Audrey Sullivan Moore. I'm a native Floridian and also educated in the public school system, which I truly believe in. I'm a graduate of the University of South Florida. I requested and put in an application, so I was appointed by the county commission, and I'm here to serve as a parent, school district employee, and just a social activist for the community, and I want to serve this board in all those capacities, and I thank you for the opportunity.
Good afternoon. My name is Jay Hollenkamp. I live in downtown Plant City. Live and work there. I'm a small business owner alongside my brother. Am a former corporate bankruptcy lawyer. Attended the University of Florida, got a degree in finance and in law. The last 3 years or so, a passion project of mine has been revitalizing historic downtown areas, much like we have in Plant City. So as a result of that, I was appointed by Mayor Rick Lott.
Right, I think that's everyone. Thank you all for your, I think that's everyone. Thank you for your introductions. And at this time, I'd like to introduce Sam Hamilton from the Hillsborough County Attorney's Office, who will brief you on your duties as IOC members.
Thanks, Dr. Wong. Hi, Sam Hamilton. Welcome, everybody. I'm going to very briefly go over your responsibilities and duties under the charter amendment, and feel free, obviously, if you have any questions now or after the meeting, you can certainly contact our office and be happy to assist in any way, shape, or form that we can. Really want to sum up this committee's responsibilities into, there's really 4 tasks, and I'll put it this way. There are 2 on the front end of the process, the annual process, and 2 on the back end of the annual process. The front end of the process, one of the main responsibilities is to look at each agency's project plan on an annual basis and to see if it complies with applicable law. That's the certification process. Sidebar to that, if you will, there also is a provision in the charter if someone presents a project independent of one of the agencies. If a citizen attends your meeting and presents a project and says, a particular jurisdiction, be it one of the cities, be it Hart, be it Hillsborough County, if you will, presents a project that, say, for instance, is not in their project plan that's been approved by the respective governing body of that agency and submitted to the IOC for the certification process. If that happens, you can review that project and then forward it to the relevant agency for review. Those are pretty much the front end portion of the process, and that's on an annualized basis, if you will. The back end of the process is what I'll just sort of refer to as the audit process. There are requirements in the charter amendment for the clerk to undertake an annual audit of all the expenditures. This body is involved in that process. You would review those findings that are made by the audit. You would then make findings. There's also an annual report process that you would put together that would essentially address to the public. There are various reporting requirements. I won't go into that detail now because that's down the road, but you would actually report your findings of what, the outcome of that audit. Those are essentially the four main functions. If you've got any questions now, happy to address them. Yes, sir.
You touched on it, but can you explain if a citizen wants to bring forth an item and doesn't want to bring it through the agency, how does that work? And is there a step that they have to go through to do that, or they can just come to the meeting and present that?
They can basically just come to the meeting and present it, and then following your discussion, you would forward it to the relevant agency or agencies. It could be more than one, obviously. It's pretty much that simple. There's not a formalized process, if you will, at the moment. Yes, sir.
Hi, we haven't had a chance to meet. I'm Rick Fernandez. Thank you for the presentation.
Sure.
There are a couple of things going on in a different lane right now. One is the county ordinance that I understand is going to be litigated, for lack of a better word, over the course of the next few weeks in front of the Board of County Commission. I think there's a meeting scheduled on September 5, and then maybe another one about 2 weeks later.
Sure, happy to give you a quick update if
we
you
might
like on
actually,
that.
well, the actual question is, are our duties and responsibilities likely or possibly to be affected in some way by what the final ordinance looks like?
Pretty doubtful, I would think, at this point. The ordinance, essentially what the board has directed us to put together, and that the ordinance will be presented to the county commission on September 5th. I anticipate, it's obviously up to the county commission, I anticipate they will schedule a public hearing. They typically do that at the following meeting, so that would be September 18th. Obviously, given the nature of this, that may or may not happen, but that's the time frame I would anticipate. I don't think it's going to impact your responsibilities at this juncture, because essentially what the ordinance does, with a few exceptions where there are some discrete legal concerns, the ordinance, the direction from the county commission was to reinstall, if you will, for want of a better term, the use, allocation, and distribution provisions that the trial court found to be problematic because of the process in which they were adopted. The key issue being, under statute, the court found that the county commission had to make those decisions as opposed to the particular mechanism that was used for that process. And that's largely what the ordinance does. And I'm happy to share, we can provide copies of that ordinance. It actually, an earlier draft, which is really not that different than what's going to be submitted, but certainly we could provide updates. But a draft of that ordinance has been on the county's website for roughly 10 days, I think a week ago Thursday, give or take. But that's really what the import of that ordinance is. Of course.
Yes, sir, Mr. Hamilton. One of the first items you mentioned is our role as it relates to what we receive from each of the agencies. Will not that list of projects and what we receive from an agency be reviewed by that attorney and their accounting folks to certify that it is in accordance with state and federal law when we receive it?
There is a process. There are the various agencies that would receive the surtax funds entered into an interlocal agreement. I'm trying to recall the date, but it was several months ago. But it actually adds to the process for the government's receiving funds. There's an engineering certification, and I think it was more so with HART, because they're not building so much stuff as they're buying things, obviously buses and whatnot. In lieu of an engineer certification, there would be a procurement professional. So yes, to an extent, that process is added to the equation based on that interlocal. Exact. True. Mr. Fletcher, do you have a question?
Just to follow up on the earlier question about our powers and duties, would you brief us a little bit on the litigation and how that's likely to affect this? I think you covered the trial court opinion. I think there's still some appellate activity going on as well.
Right, and just, I think everybody is aware, generally speaking, the trial court, there were actually 2 trial court judgments, but I'm really going to refer to the bond validation. The county, when the litigation ensued, the county commission, we made a recommendation because of the expedited nature of bond validation proceedings to file a bond validation. And essentially what that is, it's a statutory process where a local government can go to court and say it wants to issue some type of debt instrument backed by a particular revenue stream. In this case, obviously, it's the surtax revenue. And the way that process works by state law, it's expedited. If there's an appeal from the trial court, most regular litigation goes to the appellate court. In this area, it would be the Second District Court of Appeal. Bond validations skip that intermediate process. They go directly to the Florida Supreme Court. Every nature of the process is expedited. That's the reason we took that route. There have been appeals filed. I think everybody knows that. So the matter will be scheduled for consideration by the Florida Supreme Court. We're hopeful that will occur by the end of the calendar year. Not sure that's going to happen given to the nature of the upcoming holidays and all that sort of thing, and the briefing schedules and whatnot. Can't really speak to what the outcome of that could be because there are many alternatives. I mean, it could be complete approval of what the trial court did. It could reinstate all the provisions. The final judgment of the Supreme Court could reinstate all of the provisions that were stricken by the trial court. Obviously, the one area that is also a potential, it can invalidate the charter amendment. But we just don't know. We feel very comfortable with the arguments we have, obviously. But we're just going to, that's the unknown. But the outcome of that, certainly, I mean, we will advise the county commission with the upcoming ordinance that depending upon what happens with the Supreme Court action, that could impact the ordinance, that could impact the charter amendment. It's sort of a stay tuned, if you will. Yes, sir.
Mr. Hamilton, thank you for your presentation.
Sure.
And just a couple of questions. It appears that right now, based on what we think we know, we're going to be reviewing plans
Correct.
that agencies will present to make sure they're in
Correct.
compliance. We'll also review the audit at year end to ensure that based on those testing and audit techniques that the funds have gone where they're supposed to. From a monitoring standpoint in this committee's mechanical operation, what kind of, how often would we meet? How often would we need to monitor? What, based on what we can envision and what we think is going to happen, and I know there's no guarantees, but just
Right.
an opinion as to what beyond those 2 things, what is our frequency of meetings going to be? What kind of things are we going to look at what kind of time? Kind of looking at building a timeline of what we're going to be expected to do.
I mean, I would answer it this way. Part of it, obviously, is the desire of this body. I mean, at any point during the year, the projects that citizens or groups submit, if you will, that could happen at any point in time. It's certainly whatever this committee would like to do as far as frequency of meetings. There's nothing that precludes that. There's nothing that speaks to the timing of these types of things, if you will. That being said, certainly what the charter does speak to, and most of it was not, most of this particular provision dealing with the so-called agency project plans, most of it was not impacted by the trial court judgment. That process calls for the agencies to submit plans that are approved by their respective governing bodies by September 30 of each year. that's when the IOC steps in to review those project plans. So obviously, the process is going to be heavier on the front end, if you will, before the following calendar year. And then the audit is an annualized audit, if you will. So the back end, that's sort of why I kind of couched the presentation in terms of the front end and the back end. So you're absolutely right. If I read where you're going, that it's more of the front end and the back end. But by no means does that suggest that you can't have more frequent meetings and request updates and things of that nature.
One more, just to follow up. What's the timing requirement on the audit, the annual audit?
When you say,
Well,
what's for the
what
prior-
is there a due date of the report to be issued?
I don't think there is. I will go back and double check, but I don't recall that there's a specific due date, but I'll go back and double check.
And what time frame is covered during the audit?
The prior calendar year.
It'll be calendar year
Yes.
based. Okay, thank you.
Yes. Yes, Judge?
Thank you again for your presentation. I have one quick question on the items we were provided, where it's got the presentation by the county attorney's office is attachment, circuit court final judgment. I couldn't find that in the materials. Will we be given a copy of that?
Yeah, we can certainly provide it. Yeah, we can definitely provide
And in
that.
connection with that, I heard you, maybe I misheard you, but did you say there were two separate cases, one the bond validation case and then one dealing with the charter amendment?
That's correct. There was an initial lawsuit filed by Commissioner White, followed by the bond validation. So there were actually two cases.
But those are both covered in
That
that
is
one
correct.
final judgment, is
That
that
is
correct? Okay. Wanted to clear that. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? for
I
Mr.
have one.
Hamilton?
On the projects that you talked about that could be submitted not from the agencies but from other people, I mean, what is the definition of how complete does that submittal have to be? How would we deal? Because I can think of all kinds of things that could
Sure.
happen.
It's, the charter language is very, very minimal in that respect. So it's not, I hear what you're saying. I mean, what you could do, obviously you don't need to do it today, but, I could certainly envision a circumstance where you put together, this committee puts together some sort of policy to, call for, minimal requirements, if you will. But there's a lot of flexibility there because the charter, it's a very, very modest sentence that the charter speaks to on that, but that's a good point.
But the idea would be that this committee would decide what would go forward to the agency? Is that?
Largely, yeah.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Sorry, real quick. Did you say that there would be an independent determination of compliance of a project plan before it would come to us?
There's essentially there's a certification that's done by each agency. There's an interlocal agreement that was signed by the county, the three cities, and Hart in the MPO back, I believe it was actually finalized in March. And it speaks to the submission of project plan process. And it calls for each agency either to have their project plan certified by an engineer or a procurement professional, the latter being more applicable to Hart. That's what I was referring to. But that certainly in no way, shape, or form usurps what this body does with its review and certification process.
But it would be similar in the goal.
Sure, that's true, yeah.
I have one follow-up, I'm sorry. If a project is submitted by a citizen and we approve it and it goes to the agency for consideration, can that agency choose to not go forward with that project after we have sent it favorably to them for consideration?
Yeah, I mean, the charter doesn't mandate that the relevant agency has to accept that process, that project. It just provides for this committee the ability to pass it over. So it's not, if this committee were to favorably approve it, it really is just to submit it to that agency. That's correct.
In response to the question about the audit process, I wanted to invite a representative from the clerk's office to speak briefly about that, if that's all right with you. Do you want to say just a word or two about the audit process? Timing, I'm sorry. Want me to say that, just
Yes, yes.
yeah, timing for it and.
Yes. My name is Ajay Gajar, Finance Director at the Clerk of Circuit Court. I believe according to the charter, the audit covers through September 30th, and the audit is due March 31st, according to the charter amendment. Any other questions? Right, thank you. Yes. Mhm.
Thank you. Usually I don't need one, but we'll go with. So that covers the period from October 1, let's say, of 2018 to September 30, 2019.
Yes.
Yeah, September 30, 2000. And then the audit report is due by March 31st. So there's kind of a 6-month window
Yes.
there to
Yeah.
perform the audit and issue the report.
Right.
Okay. Thank you. Very good.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Hamilton or Mr. Gajar? All right, thank you. Moving along, the next item on our agenda is a review of the Sunshine and Public Records laws, and we have Mary Helen, I'm sorry, I missed your last name. Ferris from the County Attorney's Office.
Yes, good afternoon. I'm going to briefly go over the basic elements of the Sunshine Law as this group starts doing their duties. If issues arise, I'm always around to help answer questions. And basically, the Sunshine Law says that all meetings of any board or commission of the state or political subdivision at which official action to be taken must be open to the public at all times, and written minutes must be taken, and reasonable notice must be given. Florida is somewhat unique in that the authority for this is not only in the statutes, but it's also in the Florida Constitution. What is a meeting of the Sunshine Law? You'll hear me refer to this again. Any gathering or two or more members of the same board that discuss anything that might come back to that board for action can only be done at a publicly noticed meeting. So it would apply equally to subcommittees if this group wants to create subcommittees, and it applies whether or not you have a quorum. The basic scope of the Sunshine Law is that it's open to the public, reasonable notice must be given, and minutes must be taken. And again, as I go through this, let me know if you have any questions. What else is subject to the Sunshine Law? The big issue in the last several years is the explosion of social media. It used to be limited in the way we could talk to each other. Now with Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and all of those, you have to be very careful that there's no discussion. So for instance, if one member of this committee puts something on Facebook about a project or something that's the business of this committee, and another member replies or comments, you could have a problem there. So just be very careful. With emails, my recommendation is the best practice is for the staff person to email the committee and blind copy themselves. I've seen some people say do not hit reply all. I've seen that get tripped up sometimes, so that's the better way to do it. So if you want information or if you want something, go through the staff, whether the county attorney's office or the MPO staff, and let them do the communications for you. What about members of different boards? There's no prohibition if a county commissioner wanted to talk to a city council person, but they need to be aware because sometimes they might serve together on the MPO or the Aviation Authority, and of course, what might reasonably come back to those agencies differs from agency to agency. What about social events? There's nothing wrong with two members of a Sunshine Committee just having a conversation, as long as they don't talk about something that might come back to the group for discussion. Your focus here is fairly narrow as compared to the Board of County Commissioners, where you never know what's going to come up before them. So just you cannot speak to each other about the transportation projects that are before you or the process or anything that this commission or committee might take action on. The notice, it has to be reasonable. People hate it when the lawyer says reasonable because it depends. My extreme example that I've used obviously now for a long time, I was pulling into the building on September 11th. The county attorney at the time called me into her office and said, the board needs to meet in 15 minutes, can we do that? And I said, that's reasonable under the circumstances, because they were deciding, I think the clerk and the sheriff also attended, deciding whether or not to close the building. That is an extreme example. Rule of thumb is 24 hours. You've got very capable staff here that is going to provide those notices. So, you know, if they have any questions about a notice, they can let me know. You don't have to have an agenda in the notice. It's the time, the place, the subject matter. There was a bill that went through a couple sessions ago that would limit a sunshine board to only discuss things on the agenda. That did not pass. Because I can tell you over the years, I've seen people come to public comment at the board meetings. They might bring up an issue that the board wants to act on. So if something comes up that's not on the agenda, you still can take action on it. You just got to be careful and be reasonable when you do that. The public's right to participate was new in, I think, 2013. You have to have a time for public comment. You can set up reasonable rules like the boards does with the rules of order, a time limit, and things of that nature. That is it. The open to the public piece, I would assume you're going to probably use this room or some room in the county center, but that would prohibit you from having a sunshine meeting in a private club or some other place that the public is not allowed to attend. That's pretty much it in a nutshell. I don't really have a lot of time to do a lot about public records. I will say that the staff would basically be the custodian of the official records, the minutes and the documents and all of that thing that is generated. A question that I get quite often, if you just make personal notes to yourself and you don't share them with anybody, they're probably not a public record. But if we get public records requests, I can assure you I'll probably be involved at some point, and we can go through those issues as they come up. Yeah.
In the event of an incidental violation, is there a self-reporting mechanism? How would you like us to deal with that?
Would rather not happen to begin with. There is a process, it's not often that I see it, called a cure meeting, typically with an unintentional, because basically if there's a violation of the Sunshine Law, the action the committee took is void. So there's a process for a cure committee, a meeting. I won't go into all the details, but you basically put everything back on the record to make sure that, and the minutes will reflect that, what the problem was, and you kind of, it's a redo, so to speak. All right, thank you very much. Oh,
Just glancing at the proposed policy of this organization, do you expect us, or maybe Beth might, do you expect us to have public hearings? Are all of our meetings public meetings, but difference of public hearings? Could you help me understand the difference?
So all of your meetings will be public meetings held in compliance with the government and the Sunshine Law. There is, I believe, a requirement for an annual public hearing.
An annual public hearing?
I believe that that's true.
On the audit?
Yes.
Okay.
So when we come to the end of the year.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Ms. Ferris about Sunshine Law? All right, thank you. Next up on the agenda, we have a review and briefing on IOC bylaws, and Sam Hamilton from the Attorney's Office will handle that as well.
Hello again. As Dr. Wong said, we have before you draft bylaws. It's my understanding staff initially put these together. They are largely tailored after the MPO's bylaws. I would say they're relatively standard, if you will. They have been revised to address this particular committee, some of the charter requirements, if you will. Also, two other areas I just wanted to address. One of the members did request certain changes, which we do have a revised draft that we can certainly share with you. There were a number of edits to the document that they're substantive, they're not huge issues, they're process issues. We have absolutely no issue with any of them, no concerns whatsoever. They actually make for a better document, if you will. In addition, there was one other change, and this ties into the ordinance process that I referenced earlier. The revised draft that we submitted revises the powers provision of the bylaws as to the powers of the IOC. It eliminates the stated powers. The only reason for that is because as of yet, obviously, the county commission has not acted on the ordinance. I don't anticipate those powers are going to change. We just felt it made more sense to reference the ordinance provision, or not just reference the adoption of the ordinance as opposed to the specific powers. We could always come back later and revise the bylaws if you would see fit to reinstitute those provisions. But it really is just kind of a form over substance, substance issue at this point. Other than that, if you have any questions.
We've included both versions of the document. So the older version that Sam discussed is in the agenda packet in front of you. The version that was updated recently due to concerns raised by another committee member is also stapled and should be sitting at the top of your agenda packet. And that one's redlined, so you can see the changes. It should be a strike-through version. See the changes from that version to the previous one.
I'm sorry, on that point, since we don't get a chance to talk to each other, and frankly, I didn't see the old version of the bylaws. I wonder, would the member of the committee that expressed some concerns mind telling us what the concerns were and what the changes were that were made?
Yeah, so Chip Fletcher, I went through here and made some edits, and concern's probably too strong a word, but they are shown in the red line that's been distributed, and I can just walk through them very briefly. Let's see, the first one is on, Sam, correct me if I'm wrong.
I think it's on page 4.
On page 4.
The red line.
See some changes on page 3.
So let's see. So the changes on page 3 show the changes that that Mr. Hamilton identified as avoiding the effort to try to capsulize what the powers and duties are and simply reference the governing law that he described earlier. And I think that's a better approach considering the status that we're in with the ordinance pending and the litigation pending. So that's the change on page 3.
Yeah, just for the benefit of the entire membership, governing law is a combination of the charter amendment as revised by the trial court, if you will, plus the ordinance that is soon to be presented to the county commission. So just when you see the term governing law, it's a defined term. It's earlier in the document, but that's what we're addressing. And it just, from our perspective, in hindsight, it was an easier reference point.
Ask if there's any questions on that item before we move on. That's really the most substantive change.
Any questions related to the changes on the IOC powers and duties?
So then going on from there, I had suggested a change on 6.1, simply requiring a supermajority to change the chair. It didn't, in my experience, it's not great to have a body be able to change leadership by a simple majority at any meeting without a lot of process. So that's the simple reason I suggested that change. On page 5, I suggested going to 10 days notice rather than 5 days. Just we're all volunteers, and it takes a while to make sure that we're here on time and that we've got availability. Let's see. On page 8, subparagraph 7.7.6, I didn't have any comments or suggestions about the order of business at the meetings, but I thought it would be helpful that if we found that we needed to do something slightly different, we'd have the ability to waive that by a supermajority and respond to whatever's happening at the meeting. I would just note the suggestion is just procedural requirements, that we wouldn't suggest we can waive any substantive requirements. On page, I guess at the bottom of page 8, there's a minor change. Oh.
8.1, I think.
8.1, right. It made me uncomfortable for the chair to be able to kind of unilaterally determine whether an excuse is appropriate or not, excuse absence is appropriate. So I just suggested if they meet the standard, the chair shall excuse the member. I don't feel that that's a real significant change, but I thought that that was worth noting. There's a change I have under 9.3, but really it's related to the change under 9.4. And this is a provision related to what documents are public records, and is included in this document something I'm not familiar with seeing frequently, but not a bad idea, which is that when we receive documents from outside parties, we provide them to staff to distribute. But I also thought that the language might have the inference that we wouldn't also have a public records obligation if we distribute documents. And the public records obligation applies to anything that we receive or distribute, as Ms. Ferris indicated earlier. So I just expanded 9.4 to make it clear that it's for both, but then also allow the county attorney's office to vet whether or not, as Ms. Ferris mentioned, that by distributing documents, we're creating a meeting outside the sunshine, a de facto meeting through written communication.
I have a question about that, Mr. Fletcher. So if I get an email from a citizen or a lobbyist that wants to discuss a certain project with me, is my duty to forward that email and all attachments to staff?
So there's two parts to that question. I'm going to play lawyer for
Sorry.
a second. The first one is, when you receive that and it's related to this business of this committee, it's definitely a public record and you've got an obligation to retain that. What these bylaws do that's a little different is gives an obligation to you to give that to staff to circulate. So the first one's mandatory. The second one is something we can decide to do or not decide to do as a body.
If we do get some materials and we do in fact forward it to staff, are we still required to maintain that copy that I've forwarded to staff, or can I get rid of it?
So I would defer to Ms. Ferris. I have an opinion on that, but I think she's our counsel of record that would answer that question.
We'll maintain the public record.
Yeah, I think staff is going to maintain the public record.
Good, thank you.
Any questions on 9 point?
I have another question. On 8.0, you indicated about excusal from regular meetings. And then in 7.2, we have a notice of meetings at least 10 days prior to the meeting. Are we going to do what we did this, I guess, last time, have these Doodle or Google, whatever it's called, that calendar, and we're asked what dates were available, and we can then respond, and hopefully staff can go ahead and select a date when we're all available? What is that called? What, a doodle?
Doodle poll.
Doodle, hey, I got it right the first time.
I think that's really up to the preference of the committee. It just seemed like kind of the simplest tool that we had available at our disposal at the time.
It was
but,
great, it was great, thank you.
If the committee has a different preference, I'd be happy to oblige.
So what our other committees do is to establish their meeting calendar in advance of the coming calendar year. So that's what we would suggest doing at your last meeting for 2019, approving a meeting calendar for 2020. I'm so sorry, Sam. So, but we would like you to talk about an additional meeting for 2019 before you leave here today, ideally.
Excuse me, the final change I suggested was just on 10.3 staff, that we include the county attorney's office. I think that is all the red line for the document.
Thank you for doing that.
All right, does anyone have any additional questions on what I've noted is 7.2, 7.7.6, 8.1, 9.4, and 10.3? Any questions on any of those?
I would so move for adoption.
Do we have a second? All right, so there's a motion to approve the bylaws, Mr. Hunter, and seconded by Ms. Joyner. All those in-
Could I ask a question? The motion is to approve the bylaws as updated and explained by Mr. Fletcher?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, so the motion is to approve the bylaws as summarized and updated by Mr. Fletcher. Motion by Mr. Hunter, seconded by Ms. Joyner. Any discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. All right, it's approved. All right, so now that the committee has the bylaws that are adopted, we can move toward electing the officers. And so the way that this is typically arranged is we will call for nominations for both a chair and a vice chair. Let's start with chair, and then after the vote, move on to vice chair unless anyone has any objections.
Can I make a
Questions?
nomination?
I'd like,
Do we have any questions first? Questions from anyone? Okay, so let's open it up to nominations.
I'd like to nominate Chip Fletcher since he did such a good job on the bylaws. I haven't asked him yet if he'd be interested in serving as chair.
It's okay, I was gonna nominate him anyway, so whether you asked him or not.
Withdraw my nomination.
I would second the nomination.
Before we vote on that, do we have any other nominations for chair? Rick, Mr. Fernandez.
I'll nominate Sean. Hey, could I just ask a question of the body? Oh, sorry. Are we accepting self-nominations, number one? And number two, is there anybody else here that would really like to do it? Because it's going to be a pretty time-consuming process, but there may be somebody here that has the passion and the time, and they really would like to do it. I guess nobody wants to be chair of this committee. Okay, fair enough.
All right, seeing no other nominations. The first motion on the floor is to appoint Mr. Fletcher as chair of the IOC. The motion was made by Mr. Hunter, seconded by Judge Menendez. Any discussion?
I have a question.
Yes.
Could we have some comments from the nominees? Possibly, if they'd care to say anything?
That's a good idea.
In support of their nominations?
It's my first time doing this, I'm sorry.
Thank you. I would be interested in serving as chair. I've spent a good part of my professional career involved in public meetings, and I view that role as really facilitating the body to reach a decision. And so that would be my view of the role of the chair. I don't really have anything else to add other than I enjoy being back and being involved in public service, and would make the time available that's needed to do it, because I think you're correct, it is a significant time commitment. That said, I think Mr. Shaw would also do a great job as chair, so I guess I'll turn the floor over to him.
As a lawyer and a recovering politician, I'll give a speech on behalf of myself. But yeah, it'll be time consuming. I'm happy to do it. I volunteered to get on this board primarily because I wanted this process to be equitable and I wanted to be transparent. And so those are a lot of things that I would focus on and make sure that we follow all the rules that we're supposed to. A lot of my life's been dedicated to these sorts of meetings, and of course in the legislature we do all this fun stuff as well. So I'm honored to be asked and nominated, and I think Chip or I would do a good job. Thanks.
All right, so the votes come in order of nomination. The first nomination was Mr. Fletcher. All those in favor of appointing Mr. Fletcher to chair, say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Is that correct?
We're voting for me. Are we opposed?
There are only two nominees.
May I make a suggestion,
Why don't we
Mr.
raise
Jones?
our hand
Can we
instead?
just raise our hands?
All right,
Sure.
that sounds much better. Okay, so the first nominee is Mr. Fletcher. All those who would like to appoint him as chair, please raise your hand. All right, so I'm counting 5. All right, the second nominee is for Mr. Shaw as chair. All those in favor of Mr. Shaw, please raise your hand. All right, Mr. Shaw has it. Can you keep your hands raised? I just want to get a count, please. All right, 8-5. Congratulations. The second office is for vice chair. Do we have any nominations for vice chair? Mr. Fernandez.
I'll nominate Mr. Fletcher.
Any other nominees? Any discussion? All right, so the motion is to appoint Mr. Fletcher as vice chair. All those in favor, please raise your hand. All right. Unanimous. All right, so now I can turn over the authority to run the meeting to Mr. Fletcher, our chair. Oh, Mr. Shaw. I'm
Wow,
so sorry.
we had a contentious election. I need to make sure I get. Gosh, man. Thank you. I appreciate it, and thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I guess now we're going to move on to the 7th item on the agenda: process for IOC review of agency project plans by MPO staff.
Johnny Wong, your staff support liaison. I'm much more comfortable here, so thank you for that. Chair Shaw, I appreciate it. All right, so as Mr. Hamilton already expressed to you, the current charter language defines project plans, and the definition of those project plans is shown on the top of this slide. There's that term that lawyers hate again, reasonable detail. According to the charter language, the project plans are plans setting forth the projects, including reasonable detail for each, on which such agency will expend their distribution of the surtax proceeds for the following calendar year in accordance with the uses mandated by sections 11.07 and 11.08. Projects in the plan must accord with the uses identified in those sections, and those sections include such topics as maintenance and vulnerability reduction, congestion reduction, safety improvements, network improvements, and under section 1108, which is the transit restricted portion of the surtax, enhancing bus service and expanding public transit options. That term, reasonable detail, is once again not defined in the charter language. But we're suggesting to you all that the plans submitted by each of the agencies include, at minimum, a project description, a location of the project, the north, south, or east-west boundaries of the project, a cost estimate with project funds budgeted at least through the end of the upcoming calendar year. We're also suggesting that the level of detail found in the existing capital improvements programs might suffice for these descriptions of the project plans. The City of Tampa was so gracious to provide us with a template that they have used to produce their project plans for calendar year 2020. We have printed out that Excel spreadsheet, and it should be on the table in front of you. They have also graciously volunteered to assist and
Mr.
work
Chair,
with
could I ask a
other-
question?
You sure can. Go ahead.
Yes.
I'm sorry, Johnny, just
Yes.
to interrupt. This might be a bit nitpicky, but as I'm looking at the description of the program, it says for the calendar year. But we just heard that the audit was going to be for the fiscal year, which is October 1 through September 30. Could somebody help me reconcile those two timelines?
Sure.
Sam Hamilton, County Attorney's Office. Yeah, that, to be perfectly honest with you, that's why I had to kind of think for a moment, because that's really a function of the language in the charter. It does create that distinction in two separate windows. It can be done. It creates a little bit more work on the budget side on the front end because, as I think everybody knows, the fiscal years for the agencies that will receive these funds, the surtax monies, are not calendar year fiscal years. They're based on an October 1st, September 30 fiscal year. But the plan year, if you will, is a calendar year. And that's something that's mandated in the charter. That was not impacted by the trial court, but there is that distinction. And yet the audit is tied to a fiscal year.
Mr. Chair? Yes. Follow-up. So just thinking through cash flow, when as I understand it, or I think I understand it, the monies coming out will be monthly from the state to the county clerk, then to the agencies. Is that correct?
True, but I'm going to be dangerous and put a budget hat on for a minute instead of doing what I should do is being an attorney. From a budget perspective, a prime for example is the county's budget as the three cities as Hart is based on October 1st is when the budget starts. A sizable component of the revenue stream that's anticipated in that budget is property tax revenues. Well, those receipts don't come in until, I think, typically at the earliest sometime in November, typically December. I think it's actually later because obviously the property tax bills don't go out until November.
Mm-hmm.
So it's anticipated revenues. It doesn't really, there's additional cash on hand, if you will, that I think addresses that. It's not literally as the dollars come in that they're immediately being put to these projects. They're anticipated in the budget going forward.
Mr. Chair, follow-up.
Sure, Mr. Rolison, I'm recognizing you for a series of questions.
Well, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I don't want to dominate the time. I just have one more question. This is a sales tax oversight committee, and sales taxes are collected and remitted on a monthly basis. So, not for now, but for consideration for the future, if there's a way to somehow change something so that we have some consistency between our audit period and our cash flow, in other words, the financial function of what we're here to try and assess, let's explore that if possible. It may not be necessary, but right now I'm a little thick and I'm not quite sharp enough to figure that out right away. But I have some concerns about the sales tax part of this in which we're doing a monthly collection and remittance as opposed to the property tax function. So that I just want to bring that up and just kind of make sure we don't run into some hiccups down the road.
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely a fair point.
Any more questions on that point? Okay.
All right, thanks. The City of Tampa also offered to review the document on an ongoing basis if the committee approves or prefers this type of template. If you find it detailed enough to base your decisions on for your task of certifying compliance, they would be happy to update it or make changes on an ongoing basis if necessary. As we all know, project plans must first be approved by the agency's governing body, and then it will be delivered to the IOC no later than September 30th of each year. And because we are your staff support, the MPO will be receiving the plans from the agencies, Hart and the 4 local governments, and we will deliver them to all of you committee members. Project plans will also be shared with the public for review. We're going to post them on both the IOC and MPO website. That address is shown on the first bullet point on this slide. It's independentoversight.org. We will add these projects into the MPO's 5-year transportation improvement program. We update that and present it to our board each year in June. And in that TIP, as we call it, we can review the projects and assess how they might move the needle on some of the performance metrics that our board has created for transportation performance across the county.
I have a question, if you will. What's the process by which a citizen can get something before this committee?
I don't think that we have established that yet. We have an item later on the agenda.
Okay.
We have some ideas that we'd like to explore with you, and, again, that's kind of like up to the committee to
Okay.
decide what that process will be.
Great, thank you. Mr. Fernandez, you're recognized.
Johnny, the project plan will be posted on MPO website. Now, I assume that's after it has come to us, and we've already done our due diligence and made our recommendation and send it back with a stamp of approval, a stamp of certification. We're not approving. It's a certification. So that'd be after we've done that, yes?
No.
No.
As we receive the project, our plan is to send them all to you through email, and then for the public to view what's in those project plans, post them on our website just as an informational favor, so to speak. Remember that they're already going to be approved by each agency, so they will be made available to the public already. We're just doing this as a courtesy so that they're all kind of located in one central location.
So it's integrated into the MPO's tip before we've done anything?
Oh, no, that will be at a later time. This is just discussing how they'll
okay.
be conveyed to the public.
Okay.
So yes, as a matter of public information, we will be reviewing these plans as part of our TIP process. Some of the performance targets that our board has established are related to auto, bicycle, and ped crashes, travel time reliability, the condition of infrastructure and other assets like pavement, bridges, transit assets, and some others that Rich will cover in an item toward the end of today's agenda. And finally, we can also make these projects available to the public by mapping them onto an existing tool that we use as part of our transportation improvement program. I realize that this slide is a little washed out, so it's kind of difficult to see, but we've created this page as an information source for all things IOC related. We've been working with the staff liaisons from the 4 local governments and HART to populate it and keep it up to date. We've been giving status updates on the litigation, on the project plans that are in draft form currently. On the middle column of this page, we have populated the page with some general information about the surtax and IOC. To Judge Menendez's earlier point, we have listed all of the IOC committee members on that link, their appointing boards. We've also made some other information available just as background info on the IOC. On the column to the left, we've created individual subpages for each of the 4 local governments in HART to provide updates on their project plan development process. Once they are approved by the respective governing bodies, we'll post them on these pages. And on the right-hand side of this page is where some resources can be found, like that project assessment. Future reports will go there. We'll also link each project in the plan to a mapping tool shown here on the right side of the screen. And we will catalog the financial audits on that page as well once those are completed and reviewed and approved by the committee. Finally, one other way that these project plans will be integrated into transportation planning more broadly is by considering their impact in a biannual report that the MPO produces each year. We produce something called the State of the System. So it tracks what the baseline level of performance is for certain transportation metrics, and we try to project what the impact of those projects will be in certain areas that we discuss, like crashes, travel time reliability, asset condition, things like that.
Mr. Chair,
Senator Jordan, you're recognized.
thank you. With respect to the public being able to make, to present a proposal, when is it that you envision that the process that we have to come up with will be done? Because with the constitutional revision, the public was fully aware of when they could submit a proposal, and there was a process in place. Some member had to pick it up and bring it before the group, and if it met a certain threshold, then we would vote on it as a group as to whether or not we wanted to have it as one of the initiatives. and it was not on the back end, it was out front. So when is it that you envision that we will come up with a process so that the public will be fully aware of the time within which they must act in order to present their proposals?
Again, because of all of the issues surrounding this committee's beginnings, I think that the timeline for that kind of action was compressed. So we're at a little bit of disadvantage. I think it's the pleasure of this committee to kind of guide MPO staff and your staff support to tell us what kind of process you would like for that. We just discussed perhaps creating some minimal requirements for citizen-initiated projects. Certainly, that's not something that we have thought through behind the scenes, but if the committee has suggestions, I'd be happy to take them anytime.
You have a follow-up?
Well, I really would like to see the committee, perhaps the chair can appoint a committee within this group to come up with some recommendations so that the public will be fully aware at a time certain.
I believe the next item on the agenda will, we will present some project submission guidelines that we've thought through. It's not comprehensive. Certainly the committee might have ideas for ways that we can improve that process. But again, after I present the process that we've suggested, that time I'd be happy to take feedback.
Mr. Chair?
Sure, Mr. Fernandez, and then you, Mr. Hollenkamp.
Okay. I'm envisioning a situation where we might be sitting here in one of our hearings, and if I recall the bylaws correctly, there's a provision for public comment. And John Smith from Plant City shows up over here, and he's got a great idea for something he wants to do with an intersection somewhere that nobody's ever proposed any place officially. Could it be, I mean, I guess it's left to us and our discretion, but could it be that something as informal as that, a seed planted during a 3-minute public comment, could be picked up by this committee for further action and then sent back to Plant City for consideration? Could it be just that simple? Is there any reason why it couldn't be just that simple? I see a head nodding, but I'm not sure what that means.
Yeah, as Sam Hamilton, County Attorney's Office, I think the answer is yes. It's really largely at the discretion of this committee. And, you know, as Dr. Wong said, we could certainly, you know, the committee could direct staff to come up with whatever it wants in terms of what minimum threshold requirements, if you will. There's very little in the charter that speaks to this. But it could certainly be that simple.
Mr. Hollenkamp?
I do as well.
My question regards the same. This is all very confusing to me because it seems to be a little bit in conflict with what I understood with the provision under your hypothetical. If we are presented with a project plan and simultaneous to that, a citizen presents an idea, my reading of our obligations was strictly to review the plan to see if it's compliant with the requirements, while at the same time we could send that public citizen back to the city. But if they've already gone through their process and presumably followed the procedure that they thought was appropriate to get the voice of the public involved in the process, I don't understand why a citizen presenting here, at least under the amendment that I read, would cause us to then send that back. Because assuming it is compliant, I don't really understand where in our obligations we have that authority.
Does council have an answer to that?
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to read to you the charter provision. It's very, and then I can attempt to answer the question, but it's very brief. It just says, review any projects proposed by citizens for inclusion in an agency's project plan and forward them to the appropriate agency for consideration. You know, from a timing perspective, clearly if any particular agency has already crafted its project plan, gone to its respective governing body, its governing body has approved that plan, and has submitted it to this body for its process. And then subsequent to that, a citizen were to suggest a project. To me, it would be something that would more than likely come up in the following plan year cycle, not in the this is not it's not a situation where, for instance, and I'm not suggesting this is where it was headed, but I think it could be problematic if there would be a suggestion where the committee would basically say to the submitting agency, need to punt this back to you, you need to consider including this additional project. To me, it's kind of a go forward, and it may also be where the earlier comment about establishing a process now so that on a go forward basis, citizens know when the window is to submit projects.
Yeah, I agree.
Hopefully that answers the question.
I agree. Given your answer, citizens need to know some timelines. Vice Chair Fletcher, you're recognized.
I was just going to second the comment from Mr. Fernandez that I think we probably should not overcomplicate this. I think we should make it available as a fairly fluid process. When somebody comes here and they've got an issue, we have a process for basically sending it to the local agency to be able to figure out whether it's going to work. I don't know that we need to overcomplicate that process, and even something as simple as a policy and a provision or a form on the website that somebody could fill out and provide, I think might facilitate that. So I think it's important that citizens have the ability to come to us and have that ability to make that referral, but to try to, other than a timeline, to try to put a lot of criteria on that and restriction on it, I'm not sure would be productive. At least that's my view on it.
I have a question. So do the agent, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
Okay, I'm sorry. So do the citizens have an avenue direct through these various agencies by which to submit their ideas?
Yes. They're always free to contact the staff liaisons from the agency and suggest projects.
Okay,
I don't see any barriers to that happening. I think maybe the conversation that I'm hearing at the table is the IOC would like MPO to act as a staff support to triage these ideas possibly, so that if we receive them through maybe like a comment form on the website, we can automatically direct them to the staff liaisons at the governments at heart. Is that kind of summarizing the conversation?
I was going to get to that, but did he answer your question?
Well, I'm just wondering if citizens coming here, how does that affect, or how is it impacted by the process that these other agencies have? Are we becoming a method for them to usurp the other agencies, or, if they get denied there, that it would give them an opportunity to come here and maybe, get a second bite at the apple, so to speak?
I don't really know that that's a question I can answer. I'm not certain. I'm not certain that would be the case.
Mr. Hunter, you're recognized.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. We could be getting ahead of ourselves, but the agencies that adopt their plans before they come here go through a public process and a public hearing process and a public adoption process and a publishing process before it ever comes out of a local government, before it comes here. So if we consider this, I'd like to suggest, I heard it here, that some thought be given to, instead of sending it back for an immediate consideration, that a local government might consider that evaluating a project and considering it in their next year's process, as opposed to putting a halt to that local government situation at that time. That seems like a fair and open process, and to the local government. If somebody comes here, we're going to be inundated if we send it back for an immediate evaluation.
I just want to reinforce that, having been director of a multi-county agency, there's all kinds of people that come up with, at times, very unrealistic projects. I don't think we would have the staff or put the burden on this staff to have to evaluate every one of those projects. And I would feel uncomfortable voting for something that there wasn't any information on. So I do think having it go through the other public processes that exist is the way that basically should be handled. Or if we're going to look at projects like that, we do have to have some criteria.
Did you hear Mr. Vice Chair Fletcher's idea to have a link on the website and have submission available? Do you think that is not adequate?
Well, is the submission going to include a requirement of a basic cost or benefit or any type of information about the I mean, you could have someone, believe me, you know, people come to meetings, I think we should have a fleet of 100 flying buses or, just crazy things. Are we going to give that any credence or have some kind of basic standards as to what the project would be, and at least have the burden to show how it fits into what we're supposed to be doing? Because they could come up with projects that have really nothing to do with what the sales tax can be spent for.
Vice Chair Fletcher.
Yeah, so I think we've kind of got two choices. One is, and I'll describe the way when I read the language, the way I thought it, conceptualized it, was that this would be a forum for people to come to, but ultimately the decision whether it goes in a project plan is going to be with the local government. Okay. And so we're not the ones kind of vetting what you're describing.
I would be concerned if we did become that, I guess, because
now,
I don't think that's who we are.
Yeah, so if we want to be the people vetting those, I would agree with Mr. Shermonti that we absolutely would need some criteria like that and some cost information and some engineering analysis. But that's not the way I read that provision. I read that provision as we're kind of the forum and the conduit to get it to the right people to consider it for inclusion in the project plan.
Judge Menendez, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To follow up on Ms. Sullivan Moore's question, because I had the same question, there's nothing to prohibit then a citizen who had presented to, say, the Hillsborough County Board of County Commissioners a plan for a space station to be put over by the stadium so that we can transport aliens back and forth. There's no requirement that first be presented to the board to consider. In other words, they can come here and suggest that, and then it's our discretion to decide whether or not we should have the board look at it or whatever agency. Is that correct?
I think that's correct, yes.
Under the Vice Chair Fletcher proposal, I'm going to ask you this. If we were to do kind of what you were recommending, what is our decision-making? What are we deciding on? If someone comes, if a citizen comes, are we saying, yes, we'll direct it to another agency, or no, we won't? Are those the two choices we'd be making? And under what?
Yeah, that was my thought process. So if it was a space station, we might say no. But if it's a flying bus, well, we probably wouldn't send that either. But if it's a electric bus versus a propane bus, we might say, okay, we'll let Hart decide which approach is better.
I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but is someone presenting on what we're talking about a process, or should we talk about this more now?
Within the agenda packet, there's a one-page handout. Again, that was just a list of some potential steps in a process that we had brainstormed. It's an attachment immediately after the write-up in your agenda packet. So if the committee would like to comment on any of those steps or add some, provide feedback, I'd be happy to take it now.
I mean, I would be interested in pursuing the proposal that Vice Chair Fletcher outlined, and I don't know if it's appropriate to have staff maybe flesh that out a little bit more and then come back to us with a proposal that would comport with essentially what he proposed, if the committee is okay with that, or if you'd like to do it another way.
Can I make sure we're talking about the same thing
Sure.
here? Dr. Wong, the page that you were referring to, is that the submission for agency project plans for certification?
Yes.
Okay, because I was under the impression we were talking about citizen involvement and how we deal with that. That seems to be two different things, because I believe what he's referring to is the procedure for dealing with submission of plans from an agency as opposed to from a citizen.
What I'm talking about right now are submissions from a citizen.
Okay. So yes, I'm looking for clarity, clarification whether or not you approve of the suggested process for agencies to submit their project plans to us. Email and then posting them on the website. that
So-
seemed to be non-controversial. Is everyone okay with that?
Yes, well,
Okay.
I am
And
for
then
one.
for the citizen submitted projects, I think,
So do you want a motion to approve the process for agency submissions?
that would be helpful.
Okay, we are open for business. Do you have a question? Ms.
Yes,
Moore?
I do. So is it a moot point? I've looked at the suggestion here, and the only other thing that I would like to see is maybe some history on work in this area that's not included on this form
Okay.
of a part of the project in that area prior.
Mr. Fernandez, you made the motion. Are you okay with amending it to include that information?
Is that how it's being submitted as a friendly amendment to my motion? I'm fine with that.
Yes.
I'm fine with
Turn the microphone on, though. There you go.
I am fine with the friendly emotion, the friendly amendment. Yes, yes.
All right, any discussion? All in favor, say aye. All opposed? All right, we approve that portion of it. With regard to the citizen submission, I would recommend if the staff, if the committee is okay with that, that you kind of flesh out a little more what Vice Chair Fletcher was offering and bring that back to us, submit that back to us. Particularly in there, I would like to see a very detailed timeline so that citizens know exactly by what time they have to submit something so that it's included in this year, and they need to know that if they miss that date, it will be included in next year's plan. Yes, Judge.
I ask this of the Vice Chair, is there something, or Mr. Hamilton, is there something right now we have in place that would require a citizen to provide information ahead of the meeting as to what the proposal might be?
Yes. Well, we have created Facebook events. MPO maintains a Facebook account, and we posted this as an event so that the public can submit comments prior to the meeting. There were no comments prior to this meeting, but if there had been, we would have printed them out and included them in your agenda packet for you to see.
But someone could show up and not necessarily have presented that to anybody ahead of the meeting. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Mr. Chair. You indicated that it was posted on Facebook. Is that the only posting? Because everybody doesn't do Facebook.
There are also instructions for how to submit comments to us at the bottom of the agenda packet and posted on the calendar scheduler on our website. So if you click on that on the website, there's instructions at the bottom letting people know how to get in contact with us.
Okay. Thank you, because everybody doesn't.
That's right.
Everybody's now a
We
social
have
media
email,
man.
phone, Spanish-speaking only
Okay.
hotline, Facebook. Try to make ourselves as available as possible.
Okay, thank you.
I do want to ask this question. Is there a concern that there may be so many citizen submissions that staff will be overwhelmed?
No, sir.
Okay.
If I could make one suggestion, since this committee is required to hold a public hearing on its annual report, that might be an opportune time to invite members of the public to share with the committee any suggestions that they might have for future years, which then the committee could forward to the appropriate agency for consideration in a future year update.
If that is part of your recommendation back to us, that would be good. All right. Go ahead, Dr. Wong. Do you have anything else?
No.
Are we done with that portion there? Yes. Okay. I think we are now, unless anyone has a comment, we are moving on to the next portion of the agenda, the 2019 meeting calendar and topics.
We've tried to work with you all to the best of our ability to schedule meetings everyone's calendar is, I'm sure, packed with events. We wanted to cover as much as possible at this meeting for onboarding and handling other administrative tasks, but we wanted to make the option available to the committee to possibly hold a second meeting prior to the meeting where we will actually be reviewing the project plans. So I kind of wanted to get a poll at the table of whether or not you think it'd be meaningful to have a second meeting where we can provide you with some more history of transportation planning in general, or our performance metrics, or prioritization processes, anything like that. We'd be happy to convey another meeting if the committee desires.
I think it would be useful, but I don't speak for the whole committee, but does anyone want to comment on that?
I agree. It depends on when it is, how.
Ms. Fernandez?
I definitely think we would be well advised to have at least one other meeting before we have to put rubber to the road, no pun intended, to, one, to get to know each other a little better and, just kind of work through some of what I think are probably still going to be some landmines out there that we haven't even identified. So I think we would benefit from that. I'd gladly come.
Anyone not want to meet again? Okay.
Okay, I'm sorry. So the only tool still available to us is the doodle poll. We sent out a poll.
Judge Fernandez is good with that, so it'll work.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
I like the doodle poll.
Some of the dates that looked like they worked for most of the committee members were the 6th of September, 20th of September, 23rd, 25th, 26th, and 27th. Those, the 6th, 20th, 23rd, 25th, 26th, and 27th. And I can follow up via email just so that we all have this information. None of those dates worked for everyone, but those were some of the dates that seemed to work for the majority of the committee members. Some of the topics. Yeah, sure. September 6, 20, 23rd, 25, 26, and 27.
And what time, Dr. Wong?
I will include some times in the doodle poll. There wasn't consensus on any date or time. I think the best date was the 20th, and that worked for about 7, but not everyone had filled that out. Now that we're a little bit closer to that date, it's not, a month out, I think maybe your calendar will become a little bit clearer, and you can let me know if those dates work for you with more certainty.
What day of the week is that, the 20th?
When is the 20th?
We need to do this, Mr. Chair?
Yes, Judge.
We need to do this before the end of September?
Well, I was thinking that it might make sense from a logistical standpoint to have it before the project plans have to be delivered. I was hoping that we have at least one other meeting before the project plans are due, and then the meeting sometime between September 30th and the end of October would be the one where you all review the project plans.
And have we doodled that third meeting yet?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
It is a verb, in case you're wondering.
We're making it one.
So you will get back to us about these dates?
Yeah.
Via
I just
email?
wanted to
Okay.
remind you all to check your calendars and emails for the doodle poll.
We will.
You don't have a time.
I don't have a time yet. I will set times. A number of you have contacted me and told me which days of the week work best for you and which times. Again, I'll try to make things as convenient as possible, but we'll have to go with the date and time that work for the majority.
If I remember correctly, I think we had basically 3 options each day in the doodle poll, none of which included an evening meeting. Would it be possible to include a redoodle and see what some evenings that maybe would be available to the members?
Yeah, certainly.
Evening meetings probably increase public participation as well.
Okay.
All right. We will check our emails for the doodle. Senator Joyner, sorry.
Mr. Chair, considering that this to me is too small a room if you're going to anticipate bigger public participation. There's some stakeholders who will be at every meeting because they have a vested interest. And then there is the citizenry that will come just out of curiosity. So would you just check into a larger room? I don't know whether there's one that can accommodate all of us in this fashion, but I really do think we need a larger room.
Thank you. Let's move on to the final item on the agenda, transportation planning demystified. Good luck.
Good evening, I'm Rich Clarendon. I'm the Assistant Director for the MPO.
Could I
Yes.
get your name again? I'm sorry. I didn't hear you.
Richard Clarendon.
Thank you.
And yes, it's a kind of a presumptuous title a little bit, but it is one that we're often called on to do at the MPO because we deal with a lot of citizens and we have a lot of committees and we get a lot of questions. So this is a very high-level presentation. It's sort of based on information that I present to, for example, the MPO's Citizens Advisory Committee. So, Mr. Fernandez, you're probably seen a lot of this before. And of course, Mr. Chiamonte and Mr. Hunter being intimately involved with the planning process, this might be rather basic, but we felt it was important maybe to make sure at least we cover some of the basics so that everybody starts from the same standpoint. The other thing I would say is that this was developed specifically looking sort of through the MPO lens. And for those who may not know, the Metropolitan Planning Organization for Transportation Planning has a specific function. We put together a long-range plan that looks out 20 years, and it's geared primarily to decide what to do with the federal and state dollars that come to this area. So it really has very little to do with the transportation surtax. However, the two are of course related because they're all in effect one overall transportation system. So with that, I'll just start. And as I said, what is the plan? From the MPO's perspective, it goes out 20 plus years. It provides a blueprint for the future. It shows both overall systems as well as specific projects. Importantly, it's not a wish list. It has to be constrained by available funding. It shows where those dollars will be spent. It's created with public input. It has to be approved by local officials and carried out by state and local agencies. So we often ask people what's important to them, and this might be something you're going to talk a lot about yourselves. These are some of the things that we hear again and again from citizens, what's important to them. Obviously, most people use transportation to get from one point to another, but there are a lot of different objectives, and quite honestly, they can be competing objectives. Some of them are listed here. They're in no particular order. Growth is something that comes up again and again. We are in a high growth environment. New technology is something that's ever changing and frankly something we are struggling to keep up with. And then infrastructure and how to pay for it. People always want to know where their dollars are going. Last but not least, project impacts. Specific projects may have side effects, intended or not. They could be good, they could be bad. It's our job as planners to try to figure that out. System performance today, this is kind of a busy slide, and I apologize if you can't see it or the audience can't read it very readily, but these are some of the things that we look at, and I think Dr. Wong has already alluded to them.
Safety in terms of crash statistics and trends in terms of fatalities and serious crash injuries, that's a very important metric that we try to keep track of. Transit ridership over time, pavement condition, and travel time reliability. And these are all things that, from the MPO perspective, are important because we are kind of tied to the federal requirements. The feds give us a lot of money to do transportation, but they say we have to meet certain standards, one of which is to have a long-range plan to show how we're going to spend that money. But the other is, and this is a more recent development, is to try to keep track of how the system is performing today and in the future. And there are some specific metrics that we look at. Some of them are right on the screen here. So very basically, this is the process that we go through. We try to figure out where growth is going to occur and by how much. Then we try to figure out what facilities, transportation facilities, will be needed to meet that growth or meet the demands that growth puts on the system. And then we try to figure out who should build and operate those facilities or those projects and when. So what are we looking at now? We are anticipating growth by 2045 somewhere around the 2 million mark for Hillsborough County. And we're about 1.3, 1.4 now. So it's quite a increment of growth in terms of population, and employment sort of tracks along with that, perhaps going up to as much as 700,000+ employees coming into or working in Hillsborough County and coming into Hillsborough County. The map on the right shows where we anticipate some of that growth to occur or what the resulting growth pattern would look like. The darker hues are where we have higher concentrations of population and jobs. So how shall we grow? And these pictures, these images, sort of respond to a survey that we conducted about a year ago. It actually went outside of Hillsborough County. It covered 3 counties, Hillsborough, Pasco, and Pinellas. And this is what people said was important to them in terms of growth. They wanted more and better downtowns. They wanted more focus on walking and bicycling. They wanted to preserve neighborhoods, and they wanted denser development. Where do people want to go? This is kind of the essential part of what transportation planners try to figure out day in and day out, looking at growth patterns and then what travel demand results from that. These are kind of complicated. Well, the map on the left might be a little complicated. It shows, for example, for the West Shore district, where people are coming from to get there, what top 5 travel markets serve that district. And then on the right is just a map showing daily trips along certain main interstate and highway facilities projected to the year 2040. What are our investment choices? And again, this is all sort of the way the MPO looks at things, and I think largely mirrors what's in the what was envisioned in the charter amendment language. So system preservation has to do with just keeping up what we have. Periodic repaving, making sure bridges are repaired and replaced on a cycle. Nothing lasts forever. Bus fleet replacement on a schedule to maintain reliability and service. Reducing vulnerability. This has to do with how we handle things like storm surge and stormwater from major rain events or hurricanes or even sea level rise. These are things that we're going to have to cope with from a transportation perspective. Reducing crashes
is obviously a key part of our planning challenge, and sad to say, we don't have a very good record as a community, as a region, when it comes to safety, particularly for bicyclists and pedestrians. So we're looking at ways we can remedy that, filling sidewalk gaps, more bike lanes and complete streets, better street lighting. These are things that we think would have an impact from an infrastructure perspective. Managing congestion through turn lanes, smart traffic signals, coordinated traffic signals, maybe better expressway ramps, maybe metering traffic onto expressways. These are things that could help with traffic flow short of adding new lanes. And then alternatives to driving, this has to do with non-motorized bicycling and walking, more frequent bus service, and maybe expanded bus service area. The second part of this has to do with systems and projects, or as we sometimes call them, major projects for economic growth. These are some that are often cited by the public, statewide rail, so think the bullet train, rail transit, it could be light rail or commuter rail, expanded interstates, even water ferry, and of course widening local roads, which is something that the charter language limits but does not specifically prohibit. So I mentioned at the top that our plan has to be more than a wish list. This is a depiction of the way the expenditures stack up against the revenues from our current long-range plan, which goes out to the year 2040. It included an anticipated new sales tax source. So you can see that on the right-hand side makes up a significant portion of the overall revenue pictures. And then it's on the expenditure side, kind of goes along with those investment programs dealing with maintenance of assets, vulnerability reduction, crash mitigation, expanded bus service, transportation disadvantage services, which is largely paratransit for people who can't get to the bus. And then at the top, highway capacity projects and fixed guideway or rail or BRT, in other words. So who approves the plan? Well, this is for the MPO plan. We have an MPO board who does that. Obviously, for the local governments, the local governing boards, be it the Board of County Commissioners or Hart Board or City Councils, will approve their specific project submittals. This is a depiction of the Tri-County vision that came out of that survey that I mentioned. It was very transit-centric, and that was no surprise. That's what the public has told us time and time again they want to see. So it includes everything from rapid or express bus service, express toll lanes, water ferry, rail transit lines, and even Brightline, which is the high-speed rail proposal coming over from Orlando. So what happens with all these plans? This is another question that people often ask us because we do a lot of planning. We, as an MPO, do not do any building. However, we do work closely with our local government agencies and the state to make sure projects are carried out in accordance with the plan. So this just sort of breaks it down into sort of major phases. The planning phase, where we conceive of a project and put it into a plan and a work program. Sometimes that can be as much as 5 years out. There usually has to be some compliance with environmental impact requirements, and projects have to be designed, so we can't just fund a project without having some details. If there's right-of-way required, that would be the next phase, and construction would take place. For major projects, that can go as long as 3 years, maybe even longer for really mega projects. And then you add it all up, you could be between 5 and 11 years before a project actually opens or service commences. So sort of from concept to concrete, this is a typical timeline. I'm not saying that things can't happen faster, but for big projects, this is not unusual. So we can't make plans without you. That's where I usually end this for the public, and I'll be happy to answer questions.
Any questions?
I have a couple questions.
Yes, ma'am.
So how do you coordinate with the schools, for example, where we have issues with, children walking to school or perhaps buses, things like that, that could increase congestion and also increase the risk to the public for accidents, collisions, things like that?
That's a great question. We're one of the few MPOs in the country that actually has a school board member serving on our board. That's a short answer, but a longer answer is that we've done some school-related safety studies where we've tried to identify what are some of the higher risk locations and what can be done to facilitate walking and biking within that 2-mile walk zone where kids don't necessarily get bus service.
Okay. Also, I guess similar to that is with the development, right? So you've got your plan, long-range plan, but at the same time, we have a lot of growth, especially in the area where I live, a lot of new neighborhoods cropping up. How does that tie into what you guys are doing with this long-range plan? Who's making sure, or is anyone making sure that these developments, new neighborhoods, new schools, all of that is included or supported by the plan that you have?
Yeah, again, that's a good question. We don't, at the MPO, we do not approve development proposals, so I want to make that clear. There are other functions within, like the Planning Commission develops and approves a comprehensive plan, which kind of is the overall growth framework. That's what dictates a lot of that population distribution that I showed you. But when it comes down to development proposals that are on the table for approval, there is usually, especially for larger developments, a traffic study or impact analysis that's done to indicate what the impact is going to be on the surrounding transportation network. And for most of the local governments, there's either a mobility fee or an impact fee that the developer has to pay, which goes into implementing some local improvements to serve that development.
Okay. Another question I have, last question, is there any partnership or coordination with local businesses to implement some type of programs that would reduce the congestion? I'm speaking specifically about options for, encouraging businesses to allow their employees to telework or something that would reduce demand for transportation needs in the county.
Yes, there's something called transportation demand management, which emphasizes carpooling, van pooling, using the transit service when it's available, take people out of their cars and into some other more efficient form of transportation. The Tampa Bay T-BARTA actually operates about 100 van pools. I think Ray could probably answer this question a lot better than I could. So there are options available for people who can't or don't want to drive themselves. But there are a host of other potential activities that could go on, parking management, for example. And since I'm talking about parking, I mean, that's one of the big questions having to do with new forms of technology. Because if you can imagine, for example, a driverless car, you may not need to park it downtown, you'd send it home.
or maybe give it to some other family member to use for their transportation. That's just one of the things we have to sort of take into consideration as we look out 20 years.
Well, I guess one option that's near and dear to my heart is, again, working from home, because if we can reduce, just working from home one day a week, you're talking a 20% reduction in congestion. So I guess I personally would like to see more options provided for commuters to not have to engage any of the services on a more frequent basis.
Any more questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you, appreciate it.
And members, we are actually running right about on time, so that's a good thing, but we do have one addition to the agenda, and that is to allow members of the public to speak if they wish. So we will open it up now for concise public comments if there are any right now. If you'll come up and say your name and organization and then make some comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ron Weaver, 401 East Jackson Street. Congratulations to you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman. Thank you for taking time from your family. I realize I don't think anyone up here is being paid to do this. You're doing it as a sacrifice from your family and from your business, with the possible exception of Dr. Wong. You did a superb job with that transition, by the way. I've seen a lot of transitions. You did a superb job with that. But let me just speak of two words which are worth $5 billion each, and those two words are deem and appropriate by a Florida statute that a judge has already ruled that the deeming appropriate of the destinations of these monies that you are so graciously and brilliantly overseeing is to be done in the view of that judge by the county commission rather than by the oversight committee, and that you please to keep the 281,000 of us who voted for this 1 cent sales tax, to please be mindful that you are prepared to be what I think may be two different sisters who are looking after a little brother, and you may have the other little sister making the decision whether he goes to the bowling alley or the church or the drag race or whatever within 6 months of a court ruling by the Supreme Court of Florida on whether or not you, as the sister of deciding where little brother goes, or your other sister, the county commission, by a state statute that Judge Barbas has ruled, should have the county commission deem appropriate the destination for these monies. I would therefore encourage you to team up and be prepared for either eventuality. Technically, the law views you as the current holder of the charge of that child, not the county commission, until Judge Barbas's order is either affirmed or overturned. But once Judge Barber's order is affirmed, if it is, and I'm not suggesting that it should be or not, that you and other sister please do not take actions that would jeopardize the entire tax, because unfortunately in the courts now, this brief says throw it all out. Not just the oversight process, but throw it all out. And that's why the two words deem and appropriate for you sisters is $5 billion each over the next 30 years. So I would encourage you, as your lawyers have done very well, and I just want to compliment them and thank them for warning that please look out for little brother in 3 ways. Number one, whatever it is you now do, you do still have charge of him. And Child Services views you as in charge of little brother, and I'm glad, therefore, that you're doing this very robustly and thoughtfully and readily. But if for some reason Child Services deems it appropriate that the deeming of where a little brother goes, the bowling alley, the drag strip, or worse, is in fact the county commission in 6 months when the Supreme Court rules, that you will not have done anything that jeopardizes little brother with respect to where he is and is not bound, and where you do and do not send him with respect to the destination of these monies. As I think the 900-pound gorilla in the room is the pendency of a lawsuit on the subject, and I therefore thank you for your service and encourage you to please keep the 281,000 of us who voted for that 1 cent sales tax able to collect all of it by whatever means you do in the good keeping of little brother and its destination. But thank you for your service.
Thank you. Do we have any other members of the public? Yes. Name and organization.
Good evening. My name is Christopher Vella. I'm with Sunshine Citizens. We're based in Ybor City, 33605 Tampa. Chair, I just appreciate you opening up public comment here. I wasn't even anticipating it. I just want to say congratulations on being on the board. And please try to do whatever you can to make yourselves accessible to the public. So in terms of having meetings, of us coming up with some ideas, we really want, I think all of us want to work with you all. And part of when we're looking at ideas, a lot of us might come back to you guys with not the engineering science that we typically hear from departments like FDOT. We might come back and say, well, we really want to have an issue of safety, or we want to connect to different neighborhoods where it would be a reduction in climate footprint, whether it's cycling or walking or whatnot. Sometimes we might identify landmarks like waterfronts. We know that the Riverwalk is like booming with a lot of people walking there and activating that space. And sometimes it goes back to certain particulars, like our historic street grid. That's something that's very important to me being in Ybor City. It's something that has been lost in translation over the past several decades with regional transportation plans and more state level. So why I say this is because I think as we grow as a city, as a county, we need to look at ways to reconnect neighborhoods much better. So please just be a little flexible. I know you guys are getting your feet wet, but so is the public. We want to come to you guys. We want to build that relationship with you. I can tell you, despite if you've seen a lot of us come forward against the Tampa Bay Express project, it's not like we're all about no. We actually want to move forward, and we want to move forward with community-based ideas to make our neighborhoods much better and to provide mobility choices for everyone. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the public? All right. With that, I think we've had a great meeting, and I will ask just one thing. If you will, I know we have a website, but if you will send a list of all the members of this commission in an email directly to us, just so we have it. Judge Menendez mentioned that, and I think it's important. And with that, I believe, unless someone in the committee has an issue to bring forward, I am open for a motion to adjourn at this time. I'm sorry, Mr. Fernandez.
I do have something I just want to throw out, and maybe, Chair, if you'll permit me, this probably goes best to Beth and maybe Johnny too. And I'm trying to kind of get my arms around what our first meeting is going to look like when we actually have a project in front of us and we're going to be expected to do something with it. And, it's not like there's no practicing for this. You hit the beach and, the bullets start flying right then. I'm just wondering if maybe at our next meeting, which is more of a get to know you, get into the weeds kind of thing, if we might be able to run through some kind of an abbreviated project presentation, have something presented to us that you all might dream up as this is what a project might look like. And these are the kinds of issues that you might confront in trying to determine whether or not to certify it for compliance with the referendum. So we could kind of troubleshoot it and start thinking our way through some of the issues before they're real. I don't know if that makes any sense to anybody else in this room, but I think it would help me. And I'd appreciate it very much. And if we can't do it in this context, I'd like to just do it with you individually, because I think it would help me serve this committee better. But I'll shut up.
Do any members of the committee have a comment on that? I think that's probably a good idea. But if any members of the committee want to talk on it, now's the time before we adjourn. All right, if we don't have any other business before the committee, congratulations on our first meeting, and we are hereby adjourned. Thank you.